So I've been asked to talk to you about disciplined entrepreneurship in accelerators and incubators based on my experience. And I was lucky to be one of the first people to be exposed to the methodology, and I think like one of the very, very first to read the book throughout the process of making it. I was like really excited because I was familiar with a lot of methodologies like Lean Startup, Business Model Canvas, Blue Ocean Strategy. And I thought that this really brings a new approach with more practical, hands down, down to earth, everything. And I started like 3 years ago preaching it wherever I went. And I'm a bootcamp, as you know, for the mentor, for Singularity University, for a lot of accelerators around the world. I speak at university on this topic. I advise startups and I try to have them implement this methodology. And I do innovation consulting for startups and big tech companies. And I also build a tool called the Disciplined Entrepreneurship Toolbox, which I'm just like briefly going to show it to you. I'm going to talk more about it. So let's see if it works. Oh. Yeah. So basically it's a way to go through the methodology. So okay, you have a dashboard where you have your let me also see what's happening. Yeah. So you have basically a dashboard where you can have more than one startup, and then for each startup you're basically having a dashboard with all the 24 steps, and it shows like which ones are started or not. You can go to each of them and basically, and this can be useful also for you as educators, is the book in very, very precise form as basically a set of checklists. So it's without the case studies and everything else. And the idea is like to be able to go through it as quickly as possible and fill in details. So you'll have like, brief details, we have a checklist of the steps, and then you have like forms where you can input the details. And you also can add more people to the team and give them either, you can add, advisors, investors, this is used in universities, you can add, students or professors. You can give them read, write, or admin rights. And the thing is, this is used right now by about like 5,000 startups around the world. And I have a lot of data behind it that sort of like helps me understand how people use this methodology. And I'm going to show you some details and what I learned, based on this. And hold on. So a little bit about incubators and accelerators, because I don't know like if all of you know specifically about them. So incubators actually are a very dysfunctional model, because it's a model where you sell office space for very little money to groups of people that have no idea what they're doing. And usually you do that by taking money from the government, local government, or local corporations, and pretending that you know what you're doing. But if you look at most incubators, you will see that they suffer from the sick puppy syndrome, meaning that startups that are really successful will take off soon and go to another better place, and the ones that stay there will be just like mediocre and like very stupid groups of people. No, which actually what happens in reality, it creates like a very bad culture in incubators. So if you're just like using it as an office, as a cheap office space, it works in the beginning, but it really doesn't work more than that. I mean, they sometimes do events, they're basically like a co-working space for cheap money, sponsored by the government. But I'm wondering like why people do that, because it's actually not a good business to have an incubator. And if it's in a company, because usually the name is corporate incubators, is not corporate accelerators, and that'll make the difference between accelerator and incubator. Is again like you take a team in your company and you put them like in a closet to work on something far away from other people, and still it's the same thing. You're not solving the problem. Accelerators, on the other hand, are sort of like an evolution to this, because they also look at the feasibility of the whole initiative. So, a guy called Franz Nauta, who's also teaching a lot of stuff about accelerators, incubators. He knows Bill. He preaches the disciplined entrepreneurship method. Said that accelerators actually are like a low-cost airline version of angel investing or VC investing, meaning that you take some companies, you give them resources, and you push them beyond what they think it's possible. So think of a 3-month bootcamp with a little bit more sleep. And the way they work, they usually try to discover startups, the best accelerators such as Y Combinator have a acceptance rate lower than Harvard. I mean, less than 1% of the companies that apply are actually accepted in the accelerator. Some other accelerators have active staff that are scouts and go to all events, all startups events in the continent, for example, in Europe or across, to basically get the best startups to them. But the problem is the sourcing process usually is based on a pitch deck or filling in a form, and you have no idea how that startup is performing in real life. And there are situations, an investor from Joy Capital in London told me, they had a company pitch to them to get in their program, and there were 3 geeks, 3 engineers who came to the presentation and said, hello, 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 now let us present your deck. And they stayed for 5 minutes like this, showing all sorts of numbers and things that didn't make sense. So basically all the investors said, no, it's no way, pass. And that company was TomTom, which was the GPS company. So that's one of the problems. I mean, if you have good hustlers in your team and you have experience in pitching, then you will make a great pitch and get selected if you're a weak company. But if you're a great team of engineers and designers but have no idea how to structure a pitch, haven't had you don't know how the investor mindset is, chances is that you will not get into this accelerator. So basically what happens, they give you some money, very little usually, between $25,000 and $100,000 for the bigger accelerators. And they take equity in the company, which is 6%. So basically they're investors in the company. And a period that usually is around 3 months to 5 months. Some accelerators are a bit longer, but no more than 6 months. You get mentoring and you get training and you get a lot of support to sort of move on with your startup, but it's not really structured. A lot of the mentors are just business people from the community around the accelerator, and most of them have no idea of the differences between startups and established businesses. So the advice is very confusing and very contradicting, which is okay. From the bootcamp, 2 mentors will tell you 2 opposite things, and it's your role to do this. But I think that at some point what happens, and what I've seen from mentors in various accelerators, actually they would give the wrong advice. They would tell you go build an app. I mean, I was at Singularity University and they were discussing, a team didn't even have an idea. They had they've done the primary market research. They had 15 segments. They had no idea what they were doing. And then a mentor came in and told them look, you should start building a mobile app. And also the problem with mentors is there's no commitment. I mean, they're busy people, but they have no formal commitment. So then what happens is the whole mentoring process is usually a mess and is based on personal chemistry only and on pushing and pushing and pushing. So you don't really make the most out of it. What's good is because you have this process of reporting your progress every week and taking on KPIs, which doesn't happen with all accelerators. This is sort of the main thing that's pushing startups to this 3-month progress, and actually there's a progress. And one of the good examples actually is China Accelerator, where Joey is a mentor. I'm an advisor for Tiago's startup, who was part of the first bootcamp. And actually he's done more in 3 months in China Accelerators than he's done the previous year, because the system there is very, very competitive. It's pushing all day, and they have this very serious weekly reports that they do. So it served a lot. I mean, he's in the process of getting funding. But also the problem is that the goal for the accelerators is not to teach people entrepreneurship. Remember, they're investors, and the goal of most is to get these startups in 3 months to a demo day where they can pitch and raise more money, because they're thinking, okay, they're not going to survive after this, unless they get more money. So there's a lot of focus actually not on building the business, but on learning how to pitch and creating the perfect pitch, which, again, from the accelerator's point, it makes sense. From the startup's point of view, is not really the healthiest approach. And in terms of like what happens after the accelerators, there is like a follow-up, there's almost zero, okay? I mean, they will receive board reports, the accelerators, but startups have other things to do, don't keep in touch with them. Now I will tell you of my sort of like learnings by trying to implement this in companies and especially in accelerators and discussing with startups. And then sort of like suggest how I see that an accelerator following the disciplined entrepreneurship methodology could work and could work much better as a model. So yeah, we know disciplined entrepreneurship is very thorough methodology, and it's like one of the greatest methodology out there. And the thing is, like, a lot of people see it competing with lean startup, with business model canvas. Actually, it's not. It's complementary, and it's very compatible with all of them. I mean, if you think like lean startup is about testing and validating assumptions, business model canvas is, complementary to the business model step, and blue ocean strategy is basically defining your core. And it overlaps in so many aspects. Customer discovery is just like different names. And I think that disciplined entrepreneurship actually tells you how to do it. Lean canvas doesn't tell you. The problem is like, and I'm not sure if it's good Bill is here or not, disciplined entrepreneurship is fantastic, but it doesn't work in the real world. And the reason it doesn't work is not that it's a bad methodology, but because it's like approached the wrong way. So its approach is it's presented in the book as a waterfall method. And based on the data that we have, like from 5,000 startups who signed up for the toolbox, 99% of them drop after the first month, because it's like very, very difficult. Think of any startup you're involved right now. Which of you have gone through the whole process of like 24 steps? Which of you think that you're going to be able to go through the full 24 steps? None. So the reason it doesn't work is that people understand it as linear and apply it as waterfall. And another reason is it takes months. And I told Bill to use this sort of like slogan, it takes months but saves years. And another thing that you have to understand is that founders are not disciplined. I'm joking with Bill. Disciplined intelligence is like military, disciplined entrepreneurship is like military intelligence. Two words combined that make no sense. Because entrepreneurs are usually chaotic. They're the kind of like misfits that try to find solutions to problems. They are not trying, actually, the best entrepreneurs are not trying to create a business. They don't see a market gap, a market opportunity, and let's fill that. They want to design a solution, a product, so their focus is the product. And what I think that the methodology brings in is the business part of a startup, and that's actually a very good thing. But another problem is that there's not enough evangelizing and marketing. Bill is basically doing this as a hobby, I might say, basically started from his courses at MIT, and there's the Bootcamp, and there's the MOOCs community that is promoting it. But basically, I can tell you, like on the West Coast, it's almost unknown. Steve Blank and Eric Ries with the Lean Start do a lot of evangelizing and have this structure for evangelizing. And hopefully, the bootcamp will help. The bootcampers will help promote this in time and create like this snowball effect, which I think is very, very important. Because I think if more people around the world would have access to this methodology, you would have like a lot more successful startups and a lot of more, let's say, people with a entrepreneurial mindset to have the courage to start building startups, because they will know, oh, I know how to do it. I mean, I have like a clear roadmap in front of me. It's just not an idea, oh, I know how to do an app, but what next? So I will tell you like what my approach would be using the methodology for an accelerator, but think of this, it could work also for a company incubator and for many other approaches, like for training programs. First of all, how do you source startups or teams for this? Instead of having the classical, like form thing, if you would use like a tool of like the toolbox, you'd be able to, in time, it doesn't work now, but in time what we're planning to build is like a track record. Instead of like choosing startups only based on the pitch, Okay, look at what they've done during the past 6 months, how often they validated assumptions, what new things they discovered in this methodology, because this tells you how serious they are about this thing, this approach. Second, when you structure the application form, structure it based on the 6 themes, or even if you can make it more detailed, on the 24 steps. Okay, ask, what are the customer segments you thought of? What's the beachhead market that you're first approaching, and why? Who's your persona? Do you have a list of the 10 next customers? What is their profile? Okay, you don't ask a list necessarily, because I think that's very useful. And keeping track of progress between applications. You might get rejected this time, but you want to apply once more for the next cohort. We would be able to see exactly what happened since your last application until this application, and make a much better evaluation of that. I think a very important thing is, which doesn't happen in the bootcamp because it's mostly an educational exercise, but it's very important to help them understand how to split equity based, again, on contributions. Not only on I had the idea and stuff like that, because this is again a major issue with teams, including teams that got out of the bootcamp and continued. They had a lot of discussion again, how do we split that, how do we continue? And again, use this process, to see what's happening and track progress and help people make this decision based on contributions also. In terms of mentoring, and I'm saying this because this is one of the most dysfunctional parts of most accelerators. You have to have, if you get mentors or trainers, you have to, first of all, get a clear commitment, signed commitment them for time and resources they're going to invest, and then have them go through the the Disciplined Entrepreneurship methodology to serve as a foundation for their skills. Because if you have this common understanding, then you might be this person. I helped MIT Enterprise Forum in Poland set up their accelerator, and they're great people because they're PricewaterhouseCoopers consultants. They have a lot of knowledge about evaluating companies, about market evaluation, about beachhead TAM sizing, and so on and so on. But they have this corporate mindset. So going actually through the methodology helps them understand the challenges of a startup and how to add their expertise on top of that as a foundation. And the structure, what I would suggest, think of a bootcamp that's spread over 3 months. And one of the things that I did I tried to do in Chile was basically a set of workshops.
It's not projecting up there.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry.
Is it? No, okay. So basically, it was a set of workshops that was supposed to happen over a couple of months. And basically the schedule, I'm going to enlarge it so it's more visible, I hope. Can you see it? So basically you would have chunks of steps every 2 weeks or every week, depending on the schedule. And then what happens? You have 2-day blocks. The first day you discuss what happened previously, what you implemented, and there's a lot of peer-to-peer training. And actually that's a very important part, because sometimes mentors don't have the answers, don't know all the things that the startup is going through. So having this thing where, let's say that you present market segmentation and beachhead market during 1 week, and then tell the founders, okay, you go and start working on that, and until next week or until next 2 weeks, you have to figure out clear, have this thing, 15 customer segments, a little bit more in-depth research on narrowing down those segments, choosing a beachhead market, and understanding why have you chosen this beachhead market, and then come together. Each of them presents what they've been doing, and then have them talk about the challenges they had, have them give advice to each other, so on and so on. And then the next day you would basically discuss the next 2 or 3 steps, which would make make sense to be grouped together. And then again you have 2 weeks or 1 week in a shorter accelerator where people go on and implement this in their business, and again get feedback, because this is a structured approach. You don't. Most of the accelerators just have an unstructured thing. You might have in the first week someone talk about financials, second week someone talk about business models, third week someone come and talk about primary market research. So it's not really structured and helpful. It's not taking them through the whole process. Again, the idea is to have them not go through this as a waterfall project, because then again, they're going to get stuck or bored at some moment. So suggestion would be to get them to go through the methodology in 2-3 hours, just like put 1 or 2 phrases in each step, and then look at the whole story to see if it makes sense, and then go more in depth with it, and then choose to focus only on aspects that are very, very critical, because each startup is different. Each startup has different challenges. Some might need to focus more on primary market research. Some might need to focus more on a quantified value proposition or on persona, or maybe in the area of business model or financials. So not all of them have the same challenges. So it's like very hard to enforce like the same recipe on everyone. And this is why I'm saying it's very important to go through it, do it in 2 hours, then do again the whole process in 2 days, then go through it like more in more of an agile way or a lean way, not in a waterfall method. Okay. And in terms of reporting and tracking, another thing that sorry, what?
It's gone again.
No, you don't need to see it.
Oh, you've taken it off.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's been taken off for the last 3 minutes.
You're not used to not having slides.
No,
Yeah.
I love not having slides.
Okay.
And another thing which is very important is the reporting and tracking part, because this is actually the part that establishes discipline. You know, having like clear, milestones every week or 2 times per week, reporting, team discussions, and especially with remote teams, which is the case with a lot of startups. You might have like 1 or 2 founders come in the accelerators, but other people may have part-time jobs. Same thing happens, like in any kind of initiative that you have. Like for most people, this startup is not a full-time job in the early stages, like a part-time job or like a side project. You need to have like very clear roles and OKRs and all this reporting and tracking to be done results based. I mean, we have this talk with a lot of teams that go back from the boot camps, go back home and try to work remotely from 5 different time zones around the globe, and everybody's like, we've been part of this, so we want to be part of the team. But then it's like what I advise like most founders or most team members, you have to set clear expectations. How much time are you going to be able to dedicate to this every week? And try to implement a system that's used at Google called OKRs, which is Objectives and Key Results, which basically every week you commit individually. So you have like the company objectives and key results for the quarter, and you say, this is what I'm going to do this week to sort of like help things push in that direction, and they're like the priorities, and everything is set in terms of like results. I'm going to finish 20 interviews with customers. I'm going to do this. I'm going to finalize the LTV calculations and so on and so on. Not I'm going to work on this, not in terms of like action or task. Because this actually is the thing that creates the discipline and the culture of a startup to be accelerated and move on. And demo day is useful because it prepares them to, for pitching and for going to follow-on investment, but should not be like the central point and the main thing in the startup. Because as an investor, as an accelerator or incubator, you're basically an investor in that startup. The goal is to be able not only to raise money, but to survive after that. Because if you might appear like excellent and raise money, and this is why like most startups go through the Series A crunch, because a lot of them can raise seed capital, but like 90% of them will not go beyond that. And I think that the whole point here is just how you can create this habit of being disciplined, how you can see startups and teams in any environment, be it in universities, be it in accelerators, in corporate accelerators, that this methodology is not just like, another pain in the ass of like filling in documents and doing all this stuff, and instead of like working on the product. And I think if we manage to do this, and I'm like really curious to discuss this and offer you like all my resources, all my findings, and share with you all resources and find out how this different approaches worked with you. Because I think like the whole process right now is a bit broken with accelerating. Normally, you should have acceleration for results and link the whole financing process instead of having this like series of like every 12 months raising a new series, which basically takes up like 4 to 6 months of a CEO's life. You don't focus on the product. What if you had a way to have some clear path, okay, that anytime any investor, any advisor, any potential follow-on investor can come in and see, okay, here's where this company are, here where they have figured out, here where it doesn't make sense, and basically streamline the whole funding process. You'd only have like milestones in the whole process. And also this will allow a lot more people to invest in tech, in startup tech, in tech startups, because right now there's a lot of people who have money, a lot of executives, I don't think VCs, a lot of potential angels, but they don't invest because they don't understand tech and because they perceive it as a very high risk. But if you had a tool for tracking, and I think like disciplined entrepreneurship is a very, very good methodology to keep track actually of what a startup or what a team does, I think a lot more people would be inclined to investing. And again, on the other side, a lot more startups would be willing to take the risk and actually build things. Oh, I have an app idea. I know, so I meet so many engineers and so many developers that say, I have a great idea, I can do that. And I talk to them, I realize they actually know what they're talking about technically, but I have no idea how to bring this to market. And again, like based on the experience I've seen, especially in the MIT Enterprise Forum, what works best is to take brilliant makers, brilliant engineers, brilliant designers, brilliant tech people, and teach them this methodology. And it's much easier than taking a lot of hustlers like business people and teach them this, which they might be accustomed with this, but then they have no sense of building stuff or of working actually with developers. So basically that's my thoughts, and we now have at least like 20 minutes of Q&A on the topic.
Would you end up with less, smaller funding over more time?
Well, that would be the idea, to have basically a system, ideally, where a company can just like focus on building stuff, both on the product side, both on the business side, and then have this whole process, instead of like having these big chunks of money every, as it's like 9 months or 18 months, to basically be based on business milestones. So I'm launching the new product. If I get to this traction, or if I have like clear learnings out of this, I can access more funding. Basically, actually, this is what happens like with money from VCs. They say that, yeah, we raised like, like a 2 million check for Series A, but actually that's going to be split in several parts based on milestones.
And that's also how GFSA runs it, like the accelerator here at the Trust Center. Do you know how they run?
No.
So you actually have to meet milestones, and at every milestone, if you meet your criteria, then you get funded. Then you get another cut of money. So.
Well, if we were finished, so as educators, like if we're trying to think about how we can, get people up to speed or teach them or run them through a program so that they could then go join an accelerator potentially or be, so how do you see, how can we approach education and teaching entrepreneurship to have individuals and groups and teams better positioned to, be ready to go?
So it depends on what kind of school you have, because honestly, if you teach it in business school, it's actually very difficult to create teams that can make something. Unless the output would be like business plans and financials and stuff like that. But actually, I think in tech schools this is very useful as a model, because you can teach the methodology. You can go and preach and have Bill's presentation and content. But I think it's essential to have this together with a team of with teams that actually build something they believe in. Because then it's the moment where they really get engaged with the methodology and understand everything and are able to really get the most out of it. So, for example, if you want to try it in at QT, either in the tech part or there can be blended teams if it's like a curricula that goes to more schools. I don't know what the exact model, but the key here is to have teams around ideas that actually, after getting through the educational part, they can say like, you know what, actually this can be like a real business, and let's try to find resources to continue this beyond the semester or period it's taught.
Yeah, I mean, given that, I mean, it just doesn't make sense to have it sit in schools anyway, I mean, that's the problem, is we want to get teams that are real teams. So if it's the artificial structure of the university is limiting it, then that's really problematic.
Well, actually, you can say like, look, why don't you try to build a startup? We'll teach you how, and the rule is you have to have 2 people from the class, and then you can find as many resources outside, like among your friends, who can actually help you build stuff. And I think again, like designers and engineers are the best target for this approach. I mean, right now it's used in universities, and it's used by, for example, Rice University in their accelerator in Houston, and some other universities around the world. But it's basically more like an evaluation tool for students. And it's a funny thing. This is like this is our persona, who's like the top user, because there's an external pressure. This professor said, hey, I looked on the dashboard and I didn't see any progress on those steps. Okay, but the point is to have the motivation for this.
Yeah, Marius, you've done good jobs, and I pay a lot of respect because I know how difficult it is to actually implement and get it running. So my question in a nutshell is, how do you deal with the resistance? So let me elaborate that. So all those things will be possible to implement it if 2 conditions meet, right? So first, you need to convince end users. So end users has to be convinced that this tool is advanced, this tool is better than other competing tools. Second, you need to convince the economic buyers and also other stakeholders that this tool will work better compared to Lean Startup, for example. My experience, many people saying, we are trying for these 24 steps are too long, too complicated. This is not proven, not as well known as Lean Startup, so it has less brand power, and all those things. And I'm curious, what was your experience convincing?
Well, Lean Startup is a lot more known and a lot less efficient, because if you look actually at how people implement Lean Startup, they implement very, very well 2 things. First of all is like pretending they're learning something, and second, applying it backwards. So instead of like saying, okay, these are assumptions, okay, how would we know if this hypothesis is true or not? What data do we need to know to validate this? And say, okay, let's look at this KPI and this KPI, and then see, okay, what minimal experiments can we design to get this kind of KPIs, and then based on that, on those experiments, decide like what features you build in the product. Actually, most of the times, and I've been like in the startup Cheerio community twice and in other accelerators, what happens is the founder or like designer has like, oh no, we should implement this idea, and they're like, okay, what can we measure about it? And they say, okay, we can measure traffic and clicks here, and they say, well, what hypothesis do you think we could have so we can do it the Lean Startup way? Which basically is a lot of like confirmation bias and is like totally not working. I mean, I see very, very few startups like using cohorts beyond just like looking at retention or really doing it the lean way. So actually it's more popular and it's more used, but it's mostly used the wrong way. The other thing, how you can convince, I don't think honestly that, disciplined entrepreneurship is a set of like 24 tools, is a toolbox, okay? Lean Startup also has like a lot of good principles. Blue Ocean Strategy, business model canvas. Honestly, I think that, for example, like business model canvas is a much clearer way and more efficient way for the business model step than just like choosing from Bill's list. I mean, you can choose the model because that's a category, but I would still suggest to go and illustrate it, using the canvas, because it's much more easy to communicate the essence of that. And I think to reply, because I suppose you're referring about like internal like corporate programs. You need to figure out like what are the sort of like the things that keep your end buyer, your economic buyer, awake at night. Okay, because they have like something in the corporation, they have a person to report to, and they're like judged based on several types of results. And then you should be able to link this with those results. And I can tell about the experience that I got like by looking at user behavior with the toolbox. The problem is that, again, the whole process, everybody sees like a long set of checklists, and this is the mistake that we've done, but it was initially done just to support the book. Right now, with people using and actually asking us how he can pay for it, we looked at it and we realized that it's horizontal, and actually it needs to be more three-dimensional. So basically, we're thinking of restructuring it based initially on the 6 themes, which if you look at them, most of them are the exact like main slides that you have in a pitch. Okay, and then allow people to go more in depth and more in depth depending on the level of detail that's needed. And you can think of it as, think of a corporate audit. Okay, you can make an audit for a client in 1 day, but the detail and the accuracy of the information will be limited to that day. Or you can do the same audit in 3 months, and then the depth of the information and the consequent like risk of the decisions you're taking is smaller because you have more information. You have to be able to adjust this, and I think the ideal way is, again, like do the primary market research for your inside customers, see what's their main concern, and then see how you can create the program where you can use the principles of the DE24 methodology, but not necessarily the structure. Okay, and you can blend it with Lean Startup and with other methodologies, basically to it depends, like, is it something for 10 people, like a pilot for 10 people in the same unit, in the same industry? Is it something more educational? Depends on like what the goals are. So these are some principles that can work. As I said, I'm trying to bring the perspective from the real world, because a lot of what's discussed here is from the approach of the academic world, how we can teach this large scale in our schools, in our universities, in our communities. But this is like on smaller scale, something that's very practical and is targeted at results and is actually making money for the startups and for the investors.
I'm thinking again in terms of what I earlier called packaging. So in terms of impact on an audience, probably the title 24 steps is really daunting because it sounds long, just 24 steps. It sounds long, so could repackaging it into, like, say, 6 themes and calling it the 6 steps, it might just immediately come across as something much more approachable, and then each of the 6 steps is broken down into the various sub-steps that we know about. Maybe that would
Could work, but you can say, instead of like saying steps, you can say like tools, basically.
Yes.
Instead of seeing it as a process, you can use it as tools. I mean, it is a process, but as I said, you know, it depends on how you're trying to use it, and I don't think that going exclusively disciplined entrepreneurship is the answer to all situations. You have to adapt. Again, it's a set of tools, a framework that you can use and you can blend with other stuff. For corporations, Bill is working on a adaptation of the framework that's targeted at the specifics of the internal innovation process. There are variations for NGOs or for social entrepreneurship, and it's open source. You can hack it, and that's the whole point. It's not perfect. It's just like Bill's understanding. But now with a lot of people like coming and building on top of it, actually that's where the value is. So actually see it as an open source piece of software, and Bill totally agrees to that, and build on top of it.
I have another remark, slightly different, about what I noticed this time at the demo day, and I'm not sure whether it's to do with Jihan's presentation or the way mentorship perhaps gave different inputs, but I was very impressed by the fact that I think 2 out of the 3 finalists and many teams did not actually pitch a financial ask, and I found that really interesting.
I
They
don't.
were talking more about bootstrapping or being self-sustainable and not wanting to scale the business.
And I wonder if that's because we say in the rubric that that 10-minute will lead to a follow-on.
Oh,
So
okay.
I can share some insight from the discussions we have with the teams. So, for example, for Team Mare, where me and Billy were mentoring, actually they forgot to say the ask.
Oh,
First time,
right.
they forgot the second time, and they forgot the third time. I mean, when one of the judges asked, so what's your ask? And they still didn't reply. So the thing is, like, for them, it made more sense because actually taking investment at that point. So they wanted to ask for investment. So like, there's no point in taking investment this stage. You don't know what you're doing, okay? But for other teams, they thought of like, oh, it's an easier way out to ask for, you know, advisors or something else than for money. And we advise like, no, basically, if you trust this, this is actually in the phase where you have to get money to ask for money because this is your main ask.
So I can shed some light on the filament team, the one that ended up winning. The night before, as we were going through their deck, their ask was only like $75,000,
Oh, wow.
which is actually more appropriate for like an angel, like a friends and family. Like you wouldn't go to VC and say, you know, I want $75,000, you get laughed out of the room. So they actually did have an ask, but I think they ended up asking not for money because when we looked at it, we said, well, you really want to go up to investors who are going to put in and ask for $75,000? Like, why don't we switch it to asking for to an uncle for that much rather than investors?
Actually, it was like a very interesting discussion that we had with, I think with Jorge and the biometrics team, because they did all this thing and they came and asked for, I don't know, like 700,000. And again, Jorge being in the industry said like, no, there's no way actually that you can build anything in the biotech world for that little money, because actually the whole process takes a lot of time, and until you're going to be to the break even, it might be 5 years, 7 years, or even 10 years, because it's life sciences, a lot of certifications. So there's like no way. And then they did like another thing around, but the problem in the end was like, you know, when you look at you have to make sense, like look at financials, and this is where the financial ask comes, because you look like how much you're in the red for the first like 18 months, and then you ask for that kind of money, or, you know, depending on the industry, how often do you raise money? Normally, money should last you for 18 months. So basically, look, how much am I going to spend in the first 18 months? Okay, put a little bit, like 20% on top, like markup, and that's actually how you figure out how much money you should ask. And any investor will look at it and will say, like, doesn't make any sense if you put this together.